air between them, her lips parting on panted breaths of anticipation, disquiet. Either way, he felt compelled to take in a lungful of air for her. Well, what? Shouldn't we be getting on by now? Ah, at once he understood. His appreciative gaze drifted over her voluptuous form, then focused on those strands of pearls above the rapid rising and falling of her lush bosom. Clearly, she was a young courtesan. Perhaps she'd been looking for a new protector, and, drunk out of his gourd, he'd invited her into his carriage. A pity, really. My apologies, sweets. I wish I had the coin to afford you. Alas, I do not, nor do I ever mix business with pleasure. In my opinion, carnal delights should be uninhibited and unconstrained by the obligations of monetary transactions. Her tawny brows furrowed, and a tiny rosebud of wrinkles formed above her nose. What are you? Abruptly, her cheeks flushed to crimson. Then her mouth formed a small, round O. She swallowed and shifted back on the bench with a crunch of taffeta. Surrounded by voluminous netting, she looked like a fuzzy-headed caterpillar in the midst of slipping into a chrysalis for an overdue nap. A grumpy caterpillar who started to wag her finger at him. You should be ashamed of yourself. I'm not going to become a harlot or a street strumpet. Jane said you were slow-witted, but honestly, I didn't realize she'd left me in the hands of a proper buffoon. She darted another glance through the carriage window. Oh, this was a mistake. I knew it all along, and yet there was no other way. And now there's no going back either. I just made certain of that. Asher ignored the buffoon remark for the moment. Jane? Your cousin, of course. He was fairly positive he didn't have a cousin named Jane, but there was the off chance that he'd merely lost her in the opaque quagmire between his ears. The courtesan spared him with an impatient glare, as if she'd expected him to say something in response. When he didn't, she groused. Honestly, do you think it possible for us to continue this introduction en route, since my father is doubtless discovering my absence and bound to burst upon us at any moment? The threat of her father's wrath, or any father really, spurred Asher into motion. He called out to the driver, and with a crack of the whip, the carriage jolted. And so did the contents of his skull. Squinting, he took another long look at his companion. When she was perturbed, the outer cinnamon band of her irises seemed more like a ring of fire encircling molten green pools. And as he stared into them, his head cleared bit by bit. Stretching out his legs, he kicked an empty bottle that coggled a few memories into place. Your father a tyrant, is he? Not entirely. He isn't one to shout or to raise his hand when an opposing argument is set before him. However, she hesitated, pursing those pink lips thoughtfully. He has a knack for turning conversations into mazes, and before you know it, you've agreed to whatever he wanted in the first place. He nodded in commiseration, having been sired by a master manipulator as well. In fact, come to think of it, he was the reason Asher was here. If it wasn't for his dear old pater, then he wouldn't have heaps of debt waiting to bury him alive. Asher even recalled forming a desperate plan to finally liberate himself from the Luciferian tyranny. But what was that plan precisely? He had no idea, though he seemed to recall being disgusted by his own actions. Enough to drink an entire pint of rum, enough to take a carriage to the church last night, enough to wait outside until morning for his chance to know. Asher sat forward as realization dawned, and he winced at the shaft of silver light lancing through the centre of the carriage. Lowering his face into the cup of his hands, he mumbled, Just so we're perfectly clear, your name is Miss Winnifred Humphries. Yes, of course. Now he recalled everything. She was the heiress he intended to kidnap. Chapter 1. The week before. Winnifred Humphries never imagined that the sum of her existence would dwindle down to corsets and cakes, cinched laces and afternoon teas, whalebone and wedding plans. Betrothed at the beginning of her second season, she'd hoped for waltzes and even warm lemonade, glittering chandeliers and moonlit terraces, shared secrets and stolen kisses. But those things...